I'm Tim Phillips, CEO of Phillips & Company Advisors. Our mission is to improve your life and financial strength through education, information, and collaboration. To that end, we're always trying to simplify complex and sometimes counterintuitive financial concepts. We've asked our friend and what I believe is one of the greatest financial writers of our time, Morgan Housel, tell us a few stories in hopes of simplifying some of those complex concepts. We hope you find them impactful. Morgan, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, I'm Morgan Housel, and I'm really excited to get a chance to do these videos for Phillips & Company. The idea that's had the biggest influence on my career as an investor is the idea that investing is not the study of finance. Investing is a study of how people behave with money. And since it's a study of behavior, there's so much that we can learn about investing by looking at fields other than investing. Because topics like greed and fear and risk and opportunity impact so many different fields. And they are also the most important topics in investing. My friend Patrick O'Shaughnessy has this great quote where he says, "It is more important to read around your field rather than in your field." It's so important in investing. And so what I want to do with you today is share with you two stories, neither of which has anything to do with investing. And I've never discussed these in person or on camera before, but both of them teach us something that is so important in investing, which is the idea of time in the market versus timing the market. And the first is a story about forests. Now, most young tree saplings in a forest spend their early decades under the shade of their mother's canopy. It looks something like this. And their mothers drop a seed, and the tree that grew out of that seed lives under its mother, who blocks most of the sunlight, is blocking the sunlight from the baby tree. Now, that's really important because limited sunlight on that sapling means the sapling grows slow. And slow growth leads to dense hardwood. It's growing slow, so it has time to get really hard and strong and dense. But something interesting happens if you plant a tree in an open field, which is that free from the shade of bigger trees, the sapling gorges on as much sunlight as it can get, and it grows fast. Fast growth leads to soft, airy wood that didn't have time to densify. And soft, airy wood is a breeding ground for fungus and disease and ultimately a short life. A tree that grows quickly rots quickly, and therefore it never has a chance to grow old, which is exactly how it works in business and investing, isn't it? I mean, there is a graveyard of companies and investors who tried to grow too fast. They wanted to reap a decade's worth of rewards in a year or less. And they end up learning the hard way that capitalism does not like it when you try to use a cheat code. Okay, so now one other story for you today, and this one is about fish. I want to tell you about an experiment that took place a couple years ago, which is if you take two groups of identical baby fish and you put one in abnormally cold water and the other in warm water, there's a certain temperature on either one of those ends that does something really interesting, which is that fish living in cold water grow slower than normal, and fish in warm water grow faster than normal. If you put both groups back in regular temperature water, they'll eventually converge to become normal, full-size adults. But something really important happened during the experiment, which is that the fish that's with slowed down growth in the cold water in their early days go on to live 30% longer than average. While the fish in the warm water that grew faster than average, their lives were 15% shorter than average. That's what these biologists from the University of Glasgow found a few years ago. And the cause of this wasn't complicated. It was that supercharged growth can cause permanent tissue damage. And as the biologist put it, quote, it may only be achieved by a diversion of resources away from maintenance and repair. Slow down growth in cold water does the opposite. It allows for an increase of allocation to maintenance and repair. The researchers wrote, quote, "You might well expect that a machine built in haste to fail quicker than one put together carefully and methodically. And our study suggests that this may be true for our bodies too." So here again, the things in nature that try to grow faster than normal and achieve their success in a shortened period of time end up worse off than the creatures that just let time play out as it needs to. And that's also true in investing, isn't it? I mean, so many investors around the world look at markets and they say, that's great, everything looks good, but how can I achieve my returns faster? How can I have that just a little bit faster? And you can't blame them. I want to get rich faster too. Everyone does. But we have to recognize as investors that by trying to speed up our results, we often just end up in a worse spot than when we began. Let me show you what I mean. Napoleon's definition of a military genius was the man who can do the average thing when everyone else around him was going crazy. And as I've often said, it's usually the same in investing. That building wealth over a lifetime does not require a lifetime of superior skill or great decisions. It requires just not screwing up consistently through the ups and downs without being persuaded to try to speed up the gains or avoid the losses during your career as an investor. I once ran a study that showed the hypothetical results of 3 investors from 1900 through today. And each one of these investors, let's say, has $1 per month to invest, but they invest it very differently. The first investor is really boring. She dollar cost averages her money, and so every month, come rain or shine, she's putting $1 into the stock market and she just leaves it alone. The second investor tries to protect her wealth. So she saves her $1 in cash when the economy is in a recession. And she deploys that built up cash hoard only when the economy officially exits a recession. The third investor is a little bit more strategic. He has $1 a month like the other 2 investors, but he stops investing in stocks 6 months after a recession begins, when the world looks really scary. And he only puts the money back into the stock market 6 months after a recession ends, when it looks like the coast is clear. Now, after more than a century of investing, how have these investors fared? Well, the results are actually pretty dramatic. The boring investor who dollar cost averages ends up, after about a century, with $435,000. The investor who doesn't want to invest during recessions ends up with $257,000. And the investor who doesn't invest until the coast is clear ends up with about $220,000. So the investor who just stuck with it through thick and thin ends up with almost twice as much money as the investor who tried to game the system, cheat capitalism, and achieve their wealth in what was in their minds a faster and more efficient way. Now, I want to close today with a story about Warren Buffett that few people know or have ever heard the story before, but everyone who knows the investing duo of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, they're the famous investors. But 40 years ago, there was a third member of that crew, a guy named Rick Guerin. Now, Warren, Charlie, and Rick made investments together for years. They were a trio. And then Rick kind of disappeared. Warren and Charlie went on to become the world's greatest investors, but Rick kind of fell off the map. And it turns out what happened was that during the 1974 recession, Rick was highly leveraged with margin loans. And when the market fell during the bear market of the 1970s, he was forced to sell his Berkshire Hathaway stock to Warren Buffett for less than $40 per share. Years later, Warren Buffett said, quote, "Charlie and I always knew that we would become incredibly wealthy. We were not in a hurry to get wealthy. We knew it would happen. Rick was just as smart as us, but he was in a hurry. He wanted it too fast, too much too fast. He was in a hurry. He wanted to time the market when what really matters is simply your time in the market." Thank you very much.